know about y'all, but I was always so intimidated by milling my own flour. Even though my mom did it growing up and I helped her, I still felt intimidated adding it into my sourdough bread, especially because every single flour behaves very differently. But I have been experimenting with Grand Teton Ancient Grains, and they are a 100% organic farm in Idaho. And they sent me einkorn berries, rye berries, hard white wheat berries, spelt berries, and one other blend to try, which I'm really excited about. But it takes me maybe less than 5 minutes to mill my own flour that I add to my sourdough bread, because I'm not adding 100% freshly milled flour. I'm doing anywhere from 10 to 20%, maybe 30 if I'm brave, maybe 40 if I'm braver, but for now I'm doing 10 to 20% whole grains. And so I actually weigh the wheat berries before I add it into the mill. You want to make sure you turn on your mill before you add in the berries, or they will get stuck. I'm using a Harvest grain mill by Nutri-Mill. It is amazing. It is a stone ground mill. So it's just like aesthetically pleasing, but also the way that it is ground is just better in general. So I'm gonna do the einkorn berries. I'm gonna add 20% einkorn to one of my sourdough loaves today. And so that is 100 grams for me. So I actually weigh it out so I'm not wasting an excess. And then you turn this on. It is loud, so just FYI. And next I'm gonna do the hard white wheat berries. I'm gonna do 10%, so I'm gonna do 50 grams. It's better to mill, it's better to mill your grains. It's better to mill your grains right before you add them into your dough, because it is going to have the highest nutrient content. If you wait, it has a lower shelf life and the nutrients start to degrade and are not as great. So I like to mill the night before or directly before. So this is freshly milled wheat flour. It is harder to work with whole grains because they have the whole bran and germ, and they're just rough around the edges and don't absorb water as well. They aren't as elastic and they're hard to strengthen. So you can make your own all-purpose flour by just sifting the flour, which can get rid of a lot of the bran and germ. That's what makes it so healthy. So I don't know if I want to do this, but I've been wanting to try it to see if I can use my own high protein flour. It gets rid of a lot of the flour weight, and I think it's really wasteful. This is what's left after you sift it. These are the rougher grains, which are going to be what creates such rich, nutrient-dense sourdough bread. So I don't know if I like that, but this is considered finely milled at this point. This is my einkorn, this is my whole wheat, and I'm doing an experiment. I want to test out what my sourdough bread tastes like with all these different types of grains added and how they behave. I would love to just get rid of buying bread flour altogether and create my own blends. So this is 20% einkorn. I'm gonna do 360 grams of water to start. I've heard that this one is harder to work with in general because it doesn't absorb water as well and it breaks easier. I'm gonna do 75 grams of starter. Just mix it. Okay, we're gonna add in the einkorn, which is the 20% einkorn. And I'm gonna do 400 grams of all-purpose flour. And 10 grams of salt. Yes, I just added 30 grams of salt to my frickin'. That was way too much, yeah. Okay, good enough. So those are all of my ingredients. You can do an auto lease, which is where you just add your water and your flour together so that it can dissolve the whole bran and germ a little bit better and soften the grains that you're working with. Yeah, I can tell that einkorn is a very thirsty flour when it is freshly milled. Now that that is completely mixed, I'm gonna cover it with a shower cap and let it rest for an hour before doing any kind of stretch and folds. I'm actually gonna use my beeswax bowl covers. This is our second experiment. I'm going to do similar hydrations for this, even though it's only 10% whole wheat flour. I'm gonna do 360 grams of water. Okay. Yeah. Okay. 75 grams of starter. If it'll come out. Whole grains tend to make your sourdough ferment a lot faster as well, so I don't use as much starter. Sometimes I could use up to 100 grams, but I just find that with whole grains, it does ferment a lot faster, and I would rather not. And then whole wheat grains. And then we're doing 450 grams of all-purpose flour in this case, because it's only 10%. Okay, of salt. Okay. Thank you. You don't want to help me? Thank you. Thank you for helping me. It's not working. And just like the other one, I'm gonna cover this one and let it rest for an hour before doing stretch and folds and taking my alico sample, which is what I do for bulk fermentation. My dough has been sitting for about an hour covered, and now it's time to take the dough temperature to see what percentage rise to target during bulk fermentation. Since my dough is temping around 77 Fahrenheit, I took around 40 grams of dough and stuck it in a 2-ounce sample cup. When it reaches the lid and fully fills the cup, this will indicate about a 30 to 35% percentage rise, which is what I'm targeting before I shape my dough and put it in the refrigerator. The refrigerator doesn't completely stop fermentation, it just slows it down, and it can take up to 10 hours for your dough to stop fermenting in the fridge. And this is why I only target a certain percentage rise on the counter so it can finish the full 100% when it's in the refrigerator. Warmer dough takes longer to cool in the fridge. After I take my Alico sample, I then start my stretch and folds. With whole grains and with freshly milled flour, it is harder to strengthen your dough in general, and so I have to do a few more techniques than I normally would to strengthen my dough, whether that be slap and folds, lamination during the stretch and fold process, or just going a little over the top with stretch and folds. Before I do a set of stretch and folds, I always take my Alico sample out and put it on the counter, do my set of stretch and folds, and then put it right back. The reason being is I want my Alico sample to keep the same temperature as the rest of the dough. If that changes in temperature, it will ferment at a different rate as the mass dough, and I need them to ferment at the same time frame so that it can accurately represent the rest of the mass dough. The other issue I see is that people are only temping their dough once, 1 hour after it's been sitting, after all ingredients have been combined, when in reality you should be temping your dough throughout bulk fermentation, especially if you're starting at a really warm temperature and it cools off by 5 to 10 degrees. You will notice that fermentation will be slightly off and the Alico sample will not be accurate. You will have to increase the amount of time your dough is bulk fermenting if your dough does cool off significantly, and if it warms up for whatever reason, you'll have to decrease the amount of time it should be fermenting. With my dough being anywhere from 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, I noticed that my dough typically takes anywhere from 4 to 6 hours to ferment, even with 15% starter. The more starter you use in your recipe, the faster fermentation happens, and typically fermentation takes place a lot faster with whole grains, and I did notice that it was the case in this instance where my dough fermented in around 4.5 to 5 hours and was ready to be shaped. I typically dump my dough out. I was being very careful to keep track of which experiment was which experiment. I didn't want them to get mixed up. I do a gentle pre-shape where I coax the dough into a ball. I'm not trying to manhandle this or to break the gluten matrix that we have worked so hard to strengthen, but I am building tension in the dough so that it will be a cohesive ball. It will rest for about 20 minutes on the counter. I do the same motion with the other loaf, and I allow it to rest for about 20 minutes on the counter. This is going to allow the dough to relax a little bit before I come back to do my final shaping. But having the pre-shape, the bench rest, and the final shape allows it to hold a little bit better shape and build a little bit more tension in the dough, helping it have a better oven spring. My immaturity got the best of me in this situation, and I just couldn't help it. I didn't film my final shaping, but I did the tartine method for both of these, which allows it to keep a little bit better structure and build a little bit more tension in the dough. And I have quite a few videos on this, shorts as well as longer videos. I let the dough cold proof overnight in the refrigerator, which helps it keep its shape a little bit better. It also helps with building the complex flavors of sourdough bread and causing it to be a little bit more tangy. It also helps with the blistering on the crust and scoring because the crust hardens a little bit before you score it. A lot of scoring is entirely decorative and just for the visual appeal, especially the wheat stalks and any of the creative and artistic scoring ideas. But the one score down the middle or off to the side is for expansion. It helps your loaf expand in a very controlled way. If not, it would explode at the weakest point. I tend to do a shallow score in my bread oven, but sometimes a Dutch oven or open baking would require a deeper score. This is what they look like. I'm excited. Enzo. These are looking so good. This is how the Einkorn Loaf turned out. I expected it to be a little bit flatter, so I'm very happy with the oven spring that I got, and this was the whole wheat loaf. The einkorn was 20% einkorn and the whole wheat loaf was only 10%, but overall I really liked both flavors. I felt like they turned out really great. They both got a good oven spring, and I would definitely repeat these recipes 100%.